as defined by the dictionary, a fashion that is taken up with great enthusiasm for a brief period of time. Based on that definition, it can honestly be argued that the civil rights protests and the anti-war protests of the 1960s were in fact a fad because they were practiced with great enthusiasm, and then something else came along and the practice ceased to be practiced. Now, I was around in those days of the civil rights protests and the anti-war protests of the 60s. In fact, in October of 1969, I personally attended one of the larger anti-war protests in Washington, D.C. Now, at the time, I, being 19 and naive, I think the two go hand in hand, assumed that everyone was there for a legitimate reason and had an honest desire to achieve the result of stopping the war in Vietnam. Now, if you weren't around in that era, and maybe even if you were, you may not be able to put into words exactly why you were for or against the war. In my case, it was a brutally simple situation. No one could explain to me a concrete, real reason that would affect the lives of myself and my fellow citizens as to why it was a good idea to be there. So I went and I protested. Looking back, I can see a lot of positive, and I can also see a lot of negative that carried through today to today's world, both the positive and the negative. While we were there in theory to protest to a large degree, we were there because we were young and it was something to do, and it was fashionable to join together with those of your own age and do something. In the case of protesting civil rights and the war in Vietnam, there was some positive outcome that resulted from all of that. There's no arguing the fact that we are a more civilly equal society now than we were 40 years ago. Yes, there's a long way to go, but we have made progress. And the war did end, and in retrospect, no one can define any negative repercussions that outweigh the positive repercussions of that war ending. However, the process of organizing civil protests in order to influence governmental decisions hasn't existed in this country for 40 years. Why? Why, when we have proof that organizing to protest as individuals works, have we just simply ceased to utilize the practice? I think the answer is rather simple, because even though hundreds of thousands of people participated in those protests, the vast majority of those people were just following the leader. They were following an event that was organized, and events that were organized by other people, and it was something to do, and it was deemed to be cool, and people felt they were accomplishing something just by being there. When it became evident past the initial successes of civil rights and the war in Vietnam that in order for civil protests to have an ongoing influence on government, most people just said, nah, no thanks. And they got bored with it, to be frank, and moved on to other things, mostly self-centered and self-focused things. Now here we are 40 years later. Yes, there's another war. Gasoline prices are at a place where it's beginning to influence people's lifestyles, and the stock market fluctuations may or may not be influencing your individual situation. And we all point the finger at government and say, fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it. You gotta fix it. What is their motivation to fix it? Simply the threat of us not voting for them? Not everyone has to vote. If 10 people vote in one election, whoever gets the most of 10 votes wins. If two people vote in another election, it's a tie. If three people, if they vote opposite each other, if three people vote and one of them disagrees with the others, whoever got the 2 out of 3 votes wins. They got the majority. So simply saying that if we don't vote, politicians will get afraid and listen to what we have to say is an invalid argument in reality. It's going to take people organizing to the point where people are willing to lend their voice and or support to the issues in order to influence public policy. The key ingredient in that formula is the same thing it was 40 years ago: youth. The beautifully naive energy that the youth of any civilization has is what always thrusts things forward, or the lack of that involvement pulls things backwards. Simply put, we got to start participating. If anybody can think of a way to achieve results in anything without actively participating in it, I would like to know how that is done. So I guess all I'm saying is a fad can come back, and maybe something like civil involvement in order to influence government policies will never be a permanent situation. But it always has the potential to come back and get her done one more time. So, I guess the new thought on an old idea is a fad being a short-term thing practiced with great enthusiasm a bad thing if the ability to repeat that fad is held in reserve when the need has arrived?